Dans la pluie du matin, j'écris ces vers sur le sable.
And you had written a book at the time, I believe, about the American presidents called Recarving Rushmore. And so it's been about 15 years. And, I thought to reach out to you again because of kind of recent flare-ups in foreign policy after a kind of brief stint where a lot of the political discussion was centered on COVID and then AI. So it seemed to be looking domestically, looking inward. But then we had the Ukraine conflict, and now the blow up in Israel versus Palestine. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on this stuff because I'm sympathetic to the generally non-interventionist, libertarian leaning kind of foreign policy views that I believe that you espouse. And so yeah, beginning with let's say the withdrawal of the U.S. from Afghanistan. What are your thoughts on just kind of what the U.S. is up to on the global stage right now? What is your take on so beginning in, let's say, it was summer of 21, and Joe Biden's first big foreign policy move was to kind of remove U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Do you agree with that? And then going forward, thoughts on Ukraine conflict and Israel-Palestine?
Yeah, overall, I think Biden has sort of a mixed record on foreign policy, simply because he's sort of what I would call a restrained traditionalist, which isn't that restrained. But as far as he was, he saw the light in pretty early on when he was in the Obama administration as vice president that things weren't really going well in either Afghanistan or Iraq. And he advocated, pulling out. And of course, Obama came in and did a surge, much like George W. Bush did in Iraq, hoping to turn it around. But of course, in neither case, I think the Iraq war, the surge seems to have been, enshrined in the foreign policy establishment. Oh, that was a success. Well, the whole thing was an abject failure since, we had a more virulent group arose out of that whole thing, from Al-Qaeda in Iraq to, a general Sunni insurgency, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then ISIS, which was, of course, later went all over Iraq and captured about a third territory of Iraq and also a big chunk of Syria. And so they had to go back in and take that out. And it was a creation of the United States itself from intervention. On the Afghanistan thing, I think Biden was very courageous, in fact, to get out of there. And he took a lot of heat when the people got killed, U.S. servicemen got killed on the way out. But that was probably going to be inevitable from a big war trying to get out of it. And, other presidents, including Trump sort of wanted to get out of it, but then he never did. He let the military sort of hem him in. Well, Biden came in and said, nope, we are leaving this time. And of course, he probably did make some mistakes there, but I thought overall, he shouldn't be criticized too much, because we did need to get out of there if we wrecked the country after 20 years. I mean, if you can't turn around the country in 20 years, then you better get out. And I think that, it was just a waste of money, U.S. lives, Afghani lives, and everybody else. And certainly the Taliban is no, legitimate ruler of Afghanistan, but they're, they may be legitimate because I think most people wanted the U.S. to get out, and they probably don't like the Taliban, and it's very harsh and that sort of thing, but at least they're not subject to war, 20 years of war. And in fact, they've had more than that because the Soviets went in there. So I think the population, although the Taliban is harsh, I think they just wanted peace. And also from the U.S. standpoint, I think it was wrong to get into Iraq for sure, and Afghanistan at least to get into the quagmire. And maybe the initial strike was something had to be done after the Twin Towers went down and the Pentagon was attacked, because pragmatic politician in reality probably has to do something. But the best thing to do is the minimum required to get the job done. And I think the Israelis are facing the same problem in Gaza. They've gone overboard in their response, and the U.S. is unfortunately helping them. And of course, I hold that against Biden, because I think he embraced Israel too closely there.
Yeah, it's interesting, the kind of cultural ramification of withdrawing from Afghanistan. There was a movie called The Covenant by Guy Ritchie. He's directed a lot of action films, and it was about sort of the aftermath of Afghanistan withdrawal, or it alluded to that. It told the story of U.S. military men over there who had befriended some translators, and essentially the message of the movie was that these translators were left hanging, left to dry. They were hounded by Taliban after the U.S. left. And although I believe that it was right for the U.S. to leave, that is an example of some of the cultural resistance, kind of in the world of arts and entertainment to, kind of realistic notion of what we should be doing over there, because it has a very strong moral component. We should have stayed there, or at least tried harder to get them out, right? So that can be kind of tough.
Well, I think that was also a problem with the chaotic withdrawal. Now, the Taliban was sort of sneaky about it. What it did was the U.S. had telegraphed a long time ago that it wanted to leave, and back in Obama and Trump wanted to get out. And then when Biden came in, it was clear he wanted to continue that. So the Taliban had plenty of time to go around to all these people and intimidate them and say, listen, we're going to be ruling the roost here, because these guys are eventually going to get out of here. So why don't you make it easier on yourselves by just falling in line when they do? Because otherwise, it's going to be much harsher on you. And of course, they did this in secret, and our intelligence wasn't very good. So of course, when it fell, Kabul and other cities fell very quickly to the Taliban, because they had prearranged this. And of course, that affected our ability to get our own allies in Afghanistan, the interpreters, other people who had helped us out, which I think we probably had a moral obligation to get them out. But the intelligence failure and the quick collapse, I think, surprised everybody. And I think that's one of the reasons that we didn't get them out. But we probably, it's easy to say we probably should have, but it was just a surprise and an intelligence failure on the part of the military and the other intelligence agencies of the United States not to figure out that that's what was going to happen rapidly.
Yeah. Now, you said that Israel's current conflict in Gaza, they're falling into some of the same traps of occupation and mission creep, perhaps, and all of that. Can you explain that?
Well, people who study counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, which is a sort of a subset of counterinsurgency, will tell you that oftentimes the terrorists want to do something spectacular, or in this case, horrendous, to get the more powerful party, in this case, Israel, in 9/11 case, the U.S. government, to overreact. And that was what happened in the 9/11 situation. There's just been a new study out by Brown University. I think Professor Sarah Savell, that I think is how you say her name, she said that basically there's our war on terror, there's more Islamic militant organizations now than there were when Bush started his war on terror. So it's been counterproductive. And his own Secretary of Defense said, are we creating more terrorists than we're killing? And I think that's what's happening in Gaza, because the Hamas deliberately attacked in a very horrendous and condemnable manner, if condemnable is a word. It was certainly a terrorist attack by any standard. I think they purposely killed civilians for the shock value, and so hoping that the Israelis would overreact. And Israel has a Mideast tradition of overreacting, because Israel has always said, well, we're in a region that is surrounded by people who are unfriendly to us. So we have to be really tough. Whenever they attack us, we're going to kill 10 times the amount that they kill as a deterrent. Well, that works in the short term, but in the long term, you're just creating more enemies, especially if you're killing enemy civilians. And the Israelis purport to be trying to be strategic and not kill civilians, but they've made a series of human rights violations and violated international law, and the civilian casualties are horrendous. We're talking 16 to 17,000 at this point, and that 1,200 Israelis were killed, so we're over the 10 times mark, and we're probably going to be way over that when they get done. And they forced people to go out of their homes to other places, and then they bombed the other places in the south. So it's and they shut off food, water, electricity, fuel, and they're also kicking people out of their houses. It's called ethnic cleansing, and a lot of these people are survivors or next generation from the people that got kicked out when Israel became a state in 1948. So they're very sensitive to being kicked out of their houses. So some of them, because they never got their houses back, which were promised to them in 1948. So, and this legacy has gone down the generations. So some of them didn't leave the northern part of Gaza when Israeli told them to evacuate, because they just didn't feel that they would ever be let back in. And also, when some of them got to the south, Israel started bombing there, and some of them went back to the north and say, well, at least we're going to be in our houses in case, if we're going to get, there's a danger of getting killed, we'll at least be at home. So there's a lot of problems. And the Egyptians, of course, won't let any of the refugees through the Rafah crossing. So these people are 2.2 million people are trapped in a shooting gallery, essentially. And the problem with the Israeli tactics are there's other ways to do this. To do it more surgically, you have to go in on the ground. But they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs in urban areas, these are huge bombs. You see them on TV. There's a crater, and it's knocked down the whole block of apartment buildings and large swaths of the city. And so this is, in the long term, this is going to, even if they get all of Hamas, which I don't think they're going to be able to do, there are other groups that are going to be spawned from this, and other groups already exist, I think, that are more radical in Gaza than Hamas. And so those groups will probably be strengthened, and Israel will have an even bigger problem in the long term.
What is an example of a group in Palestine that's more radical than Hamas?
Well, I would say Palestinian Islamic Jihad is, because they don't have any role in governing the place. At least Hamas had some role in governing them, which tended to, I don't want to say moderate, because I don't think Hamas is a moderate group, but they were less intense than Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And Iran also sponsors them. So, it's just, when you kill this many civilians using airstrikes, they're relying so heavily on airstrikes, and they claim, there's these precision missiles. Well, there's precision missiles, but there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, they can malfunction, and go awry. But second of all, the intelligence was so poor in the initial attack, detecting the initial Hamas attack in Israel. You wonder if their intelligence is that poor, then no matter how accurate your missiles are, you may hit the wrong target because your intelligence is bad. So those factors also, the Israelis, I think, I have to say this, I think they're not being that careful because they just feel, well, we need retribution and they need to see that we're tough and they can't do this to us. Well, if you want them not to do that to us, you have to have a competent government that prevents the attack in the first place. And it was just amazing how they had this information for a year, and they even had an analyst that told them, well, there's a plan for a detailed invasion in the south here, and we have it. And they're conducting exercises that looks a lot like that, and that was still ignored. They say, oh, this is, that they don't have the capability to do this. And of course, great militaries have been surprised throughout history by underestimating their opponent. I think we underestimated the Taliban, ISIS, and also the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong during the Vietnamese War, or the Vietnam War. And so, they were taken by surprise. So I don't think their intelligence is very good about Hamas anyway. And, so therefore they're killing a lot of people because they don't have the intelligence to be using airstrikes. The problem with going in on the ground creates a problem at home because you're going to get more people killed than just lobbing bombs up from the air. And so Bibi Netanyahu has already been weakened by, he's been indicted 3 times, and then he's also he tried to neuter the Supreme Court, and there was massive protest. Now he's even weaker because everyone's pointing to him and saying, "Listen, why did this attack occur?" So he has an incentive to make this war go on as long as he can to try to rectify his public relations problem. And if he gets a great victory by getting rid of Hamas, he can do that. And also, just even if it becomes a quagmire, people in Israel are reluctant to change horses until they get on the other side of the stream. So he's got incentives to keep the war going and, being harsher on his tactics. But he really needs to, if he were looking after the long-term interests of Israel, he would send in ground troops and he sent in the ground troops, but he would rely mainly on them with very sporadic airstrikes for, the known targets that the people on the ground said, hey, this is definitely a Hamas hideout or headquarters or whatever. We need a little help. But that's air support rather than using the air power strategically. And I think they're getting, and the problem with the United States is Biden really hugged Israel too close from the start. He actually attended a war cabinet meeting. And people say, well, that gives him political capital now to put pressure on him. But he puts pressure behind the scenes on Israel, but it doesn't seem to do much good.
Yeah, the impression I get is that in a lot of the commentary I see on what Israel's doing is that they believe Palestinian hatred for Israel is essentially maxed out. Hatred for Israel and Jews is already maxed out. So, by being more delicate, they're not really saving themselves or, in any kind of hearts and minds way from, more hate.
Well, I think that's a fallacy which a lot of countries make, especially those that have been involved in a conflict for decades. That they see their enemy is all they respond to is force. I've heard that in so many wars, not just this one. Yeah. Oh, our enemy only responds to force. But if you went on and talked to the Palestinians, they would say, well, only Israel responds to force because we tried boycotts, nonviolence, and they keep trying to take our land through these settlements, and they've been doing that even since 48 and even before that. So this was, they see this is an intrusive presence. Now, of course, I think I come up with a pretty moderate solution, which isn't very creative at all. But the two-state solution, I think, is the way you have to go, because Israel's not going anywhere. And if you give Palestinians a legitimate state, but what Israel wants to do is they want to have continued troops all the way around the West Bank, because they want to keep the control of the Jordan River, which is on the eastern part of the West Bank, bordering Jordan. And I've actually been there, and the river is very narrow. So they're I don't know, Jordan, they're at peace with Jordan, and I'm not sure why they really need to do that. But that what they want is a Palestinian state that's under their thumb, and they want to have troops over there. And also their settlers are taking some of the best parts of West Bank, and they have been doing that for a long time now. And the Palestinians are saying, well, what are we going to get back? This segmented area where there's no settlers is what we're going to get left. So the Palestinians have a perspective in this too, and I think the two-state solution is probably the way to go. But the problem that we have as the United States is, well, first of all, we're on one side versus the other, but we're trying to bring the two sides together. But of course, the Palestinians look at this, and they're using all U.S. or mostly U.S. weapons and tactics and that sort of thing. And they see that the United States is not really an honest broker. And even when Bill Clinton in 2000 tried to be an honest broker, he tried to really strong arm both parties at Camp David to try to solve it, and it didn't work out. Well, after that, for 5 years, you had the second Intifada, where the Arabs rose in the West Bank and Gaza, and this was tragic. It was more violence, and so do we really do such heavy involvement by the U.S. Really help? I mean, we give them almost $4 billion per year in military aid, and now with this war going on, we have a supplemental package which is stalled over the border issue, but it's $14.3 billion. That's a huge amount over what they normally get. So we're funding all this, and I'm not sure that it's doing Israel any good either.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle. Some people believe that the U.S. actually ties Israel's hands. I mean, now I suppose that might be true as far as their strategy, but as far as resources, I don't see how that could be true.
No, it's certainly not with resources. And what we're doing is we're coming in after the fact to say, okay, we support you in your time of need. These 1,200 people were killed horrendously, and that's certainly true. Terrorism. But I think, the reason that Hamas did this was because the Palestinian issue has fallen off the world's radar. And also, Israel was about ready to mend fences with Saudi Arabia, which is a big, one of the last Arab states and the most powerful Arab states to come in line. In the Camp David Accords in the late 70s, Egypt, the most populous Arab state, made peace with Israel. Now Saudi Arabia is going to really complete this. There's some other states that have already done it: Bahrain, Morocco, those type of states, smaller states. So the writing was on the wall. So I think Hamas, that's why they attacked. Now their methods were horrible, and they shouldn't have done that. But their main purpose, I think, was to stop that Israeli-Saudi fence mending, and also to put the Palestinian issue back on, because the peace process was moribund, and you just had a new right government in Israel, which had no intention of a two-state solution or giving any land back to the Palestinians at all. So I think Hamas, some of Israel's behavior, I'm not excusing Hamas's violent attack at all, but I think one of the reasons that you get this violence is because there's no settlement of the problem.